Joining us right now to talk about what the aid agreement could look like is Senator Mike Braun of Indiana. Senator Braun, thanks for being with us today. I'm assuming you heard what Eamon just said, some of this. Good morning. Great to see you. You heard what Eamon just said. You heard how this has kind of been described, the idea that the Republican caucus itself isn't in agreement on what comes next. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think he sized it up pretty well, and I think mostly what we're seeing is posturing. I've been here a little over a year and a half, and this framework generally comes into play on almost anything significant. I think you're seeing it in the market, though, two things: that we're going to get a deal done, and that the economy was so good pre-COVID, it's driving it in that fashion. So I think it's a convergence of the market reflecting probably what's happening. So when it comes down to what will it be, there'll be some type of enhanced unemployment benefit. Every entrepreneur, every Main Street business owner, medium, large companies back in Indiana say they're having trouble getting people back to work. And part of it is because of the one we did back in March, which every Republican thought was too high then. We had an amendment. It didn't pass because we got no Democrats on it. So I think that's the linchpin. And then Schumer saying that the scale and the seriousness of it, many of us think that getting back to the economy we had before, maybe addressing some omissions and errors and taking care of the people that have been displaced, along with some of the businesses disproportionately hurt, that probably wouldn't add up to $1 trillion. It'd be less. So that top line will get some Republicans, conservatives, fiscally conservative folks like me, and there are more of us now than what there would have been before, because we throw trillions around like hundreds of billions, and we are borrowing every penny. You know, nobody's worried about that now, but that will come home to roost sooner or later. But there will be something done. It's a question of time.
Senator, how many senators in your caucus would you put in that description of what you just said? More conservative, don't want to see as much money being spent.
Yeah. So Ron Johnson and I did the proposal for a $200 benefit and or up to 66% of the wage that was in place before at the state's option. That, I think, will get buy-in from fiscal conservatives and business owners and probably people that are out there, you know, not working that need to come back. So whether that'll be the part on the enhanced unemployment benefit or something more kind of rich for the other side, I don't know. When it comes to some of the extraneous stuff that the Democrats have in the HEROES Act, I think they are already knowing that that's not going to fly. That's why you're seeing Schumer talk about maybe getting something done more practical in nature.
Are you considering money to states and municipalities that have been particularly hit hard as something that you put as extraneous in that camp?
I would, because I don't think we can correct maybe poor fiscal management, poor management in many of these states, and that mostly then gets political because it's pretty defined in terms of where those issues are. That gets to take this package into the multi-trillions, and then you're going to get a cascade of Republicans that fall off regardless of the content just due to the top line.
You did hear, though, that Eamon also suggested that Mitch McConnell might cut with his own caucus and leave you guys out if you're not willing to go along with a deal that gets something done, something the president would like to see done.
You know, the leader's in a tough spot because this is testing kind of the mettle of anybody here when it comes to maybe looking a little farther down the road. He did say that, and that's generally the way things do end up. In the year and a half I've been here, that gets orchestrated at a level that many of us have to say, well, we take it or leave it. If that top line is big, I think there'll be enough votes to get it across the finish line. You'll just see more than the normal amount of Republican defections.
Senator Scott Wapner, it's nice to see you. Thanks for being on Squawk this morning. I have a question regarding some comments you made yesterday regarding back to school and the coronavirus, where you said, quote, "Be safe, take a little risk, address the disease head on, don't just hunker down. Life is about that." That, as you criticized a plan to go all virtual for some schools, yet a school in your state had to quarantine shortly after reopening earlier this week. Doesn't that prove your comment and your strategy wrong?
No, I think when you try to generalize upon specific instances like that, that's a mistake in logic and in process. So you're going to have some of that. And that's what I like about the fact it's local decision, local rule, because every district is different. I served on a school board for 10 years, and I can tell you that down in my neck of the woods, sure, we're concerned for the health and safety of teachers and students, but the general feeling is parents especially are interested in getting their kids back into school, not a virtual education, even though there might be a combination of the two. And you'll have to kind of be flexible because you may need to react just like that district did if there's a flare-up. But I don't think it's in the constitution of most Americans to hunker down, stay in the basement to get through this. And we know a lot more about it. I'll say this, in this discussion on the disease itself, what I've seen, we wouldn't be in near as good a shape in terms of the therapeutics, a vaccine moving along, if we didn't have an entrepreneurial approach to it as opposed to a staid bureaucratic approach, which I think would have happened otherwise. Of course, that'll be all distilled once it's in the rearview mirror, but I think Trump has handled it pretty well there. And when you look at even the fatality rate, which I think is most important, it's closer to where the experts thought it would be at the good end of the scale, back in March when we really had to look at it and look at the difference between being blindsided in New York versus what's happened elsewhere. So when it comes to reopening businesses, in schools, we've got to do two things at once, and that's respect the disease, but be agile and entrepreneurial in how we start to get into this new normal.
Well, I mean, there's a lot there in your answer, sir. And respectfully, New York was obviously the first and the hardest hit, but some of the states, particularly in the Sun Belt, that gloated about their own responses, almost poking a finger at New York, were then facing their own crises where cases remained on the rise, where the death rate has continued to go up. Now, things have slowed somewhat in places, but there is also a widespread conversation that we wouldn't be where we are today had there been more of a federal response to this from the get-go. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say that is debatable, and we won't know that until we get all the data and everything in. All I can tell you, in my opinion, this place has not knocked it out of the park over decades of trying to tackle anything. And I think the more we try to do things from the top down, you're not going to have results that really end up being successful on Main Street. And not that there shouldn't be guidelines. Take the best practices that we learn from all places, but it's a matter of approach. And I think the approach has been reasonable. Could have been a lot worse, might have been slower. It would have been for sure had we taken a more bureaucratic approach.
It could have been a lot better, wouldn't you say?
We'll know all that down the road.
It could have been a lot better.
What's that?
Wouldn't you admit that it could have been a lot better?
I think when you look at the experts that we have out there, Fauci and Birx, go back to see what they said would be a good result around August 1st, and you're going to see it's a lot closer to where it is than what it could have been, which would have been a lot higher. And I think that's due to the fact that anybody out there working on therapeutics, vaccines, our healthcare system has done a great job now that we know what we're dealing with. And I don't think that was factored in, at the beginning, and we're seeing a lot of those results.
Senator, look, the death rates here in this country are certainly higher than they've been in many other countries. But let's just move on to the schools and the point that you made with the schools and trying to figure out what comes next. Teachers in your state and in other states have said that they might consider going on strike if they don't feel safe. if your concern is trying to make sure that we do get the schools reopened, would you be willing to spend some additional money on schools in this next round of stimulus package, just to make sure that they can get protective equipment and make sure that they can have things to space things out, personal protective equipment and additional space, and making sure that they can deal with this?
You know, back in a state like Indiana, over half of our budget was devoted to K through 12. So don't forget that the resources in almost all states are disproportionately targeted at K through 12. So there'll be some ability there. How much we do through the federal government, I think if you can make that strong connection that it's a matter of resources that may not be able to be marshaled by states across the country, yes, because I think it's no different than what it was before COVID. Most people view health care and education as issues 1 and 2. I've been the most outspoken senator on reforming the health care system. We'll get back to that. COVID has kind of interrupted that, but it still makes it the same. And I think from local politics to national politics, we will collectively do what makes sense. My feeling, and especially looking at it from a state like Indiana, is that we need to attempt to try to educate kids in school, be quick on our feet, be able to adjust if you do have flare-ups. And yes, resources might need to be used from here to get there to get it done right.
Senator, I will just tell you, we spoke with Mitch Daniels, the former governor of your state, who's now running Purdue University, and he did tell us that it's taking millions of dollars that they're spending just to try and get the plexiglass, the personal protective equipment, and make that campus safe for people coming back. So I think it will require additional finances that go into education.
It will, and shout out to Mitch Daniels that he is probably, of all university presidents, taken a different approach to education. I'll never forget when I was on the Ways and Means Committee as a state legislator back in 2015. He said the high cost of education and making it more effective, a better value. He's put it into place. I think they've frozen tuition now for 9 years, doing a lot of other things to fix what now eclipses the rising cost of health care. So again, health care, education, it's in need of reform beyond just getting through the COVID crisis.
Senator Braun, thank you for your time today.
You bet.